Hi guys, Amy here. I just wanted to check in a little bit about your discussion of your thesis statements for this week. Sorry that my updates are a little bit later this week than usual. It's been a crazy week, to say the least. And I ran into several glitches making this very video, as some of you I'm sure are familiar with at this point. D2L has been crazy this week, so I apologize for that. Overall, I think that you all have really good topics. I think that we still have some work to do in terms of coming up with manageable thesis statements that are going to lend themselves toward a argumentative structure that's easy for you to develop into a draft, but hopefully I can come up with some suggestions for how you guys can do that and steer you in the right direction as we work with your arguments over the next couple weeks. So I pulled out some examples, as always, of things that I thought you guys were doing well, and also places where I thought I could make some suggestions. So this first example here, something I saw in several of the original posts that you guys put up for your thesis statements this week is that a few of them were asking questions rather than providing true statements. So make sure that when you come up with your thesis that you're not asking a question, but rather answering your research question. So that is, instead of asking the question, I want you to provide the answer that is your position on the particular issue that you are arguing for. So in general, just make sure that the position that you provide is actually a statement, not a question. And so here we have, does exposure to media violence as a child influence adult behavior? All we would have to do to make this a true thesis statement is to say, exposure to media violence as a child does influence adult behavior. And then perhaps you could come up with some reasons to map out that would provide a structure for the paragraphs of the body of your essay, and that would be all that you would have to do. So, as I said, you guys are really on the right track. It's just a little bit of structural things to make these a little bit more manageable for drafting your essays. And so here we have a what I had pulled out as a more successful example, one that does map out some of those points like I was just suggesting. So this person says, while some people believe that the risks of vaccinations outweigh the benefits, studies of different vaccines show this to not be true. Vaccinations are important to the health of the human race because they suppress the spread of diseases, they help young children begin building immunities with very little risk of infection, and they lead to healthier conditions for everyone, including future generations. So what we have here is a distinct position on the issue of vaccines here. They are beneficial to the health of the human race. In this case, this would be the overall central claim that this person is arguing for. And then here we have the reasons or subclaims to develop that overall position: because they suppress the spread of diseases, because they help young children begin building immunities, and because they help lead to healthier conditions. So, and then at the beginning, we have actually a counter argument acknowledged as part of the thesis. And this is actually a pretty effective strategy. We're going to talk about it in the next couple of weeks, but I saw several of you automatically trying to do this in your posts, where you would present the opposing side as kind of some context and some maybe validation to establish the need for your argument, and then you presented your actual thesis right away after that. And like I said, that is a real strategy. We're going to talk about it. It's called surprising reversal, but basically you just present the opposition point of view and then surprise your audience by reversing it with your actual thesis. And so, like I said before, this example does several things that are pretty effective and going to be pretty helpful for this person in drafting their essay. So in addition to acknowledging that counter argument right up front, they take a true stance on the issue that's the overall central claim, and then it maps out several supporting points, one here, one here, and one here, that develop that overall position, and that is what's going to give you a really hierarchical, thesis-based argument structure that's truly logical for your academic audience. The only thing I would suggest to this person is to actually maybe even push it a little bit further toward a proposal. I know your book talks a lot about evaluative and proposal arguments. Well, we have here a true evaluations or excuse me, a true evaluation, vaccines are important, but sometimes when you're making an evaluation like that, it kind of begs the question, well then what should we do about that, or what should we do based on that evaluation? So I again saw this in several of your posts, so I would encourage most of you to think about that. So if you're making some kind of evaluation, then what would you say should be the outcome of that, or what should be done based on that evaluation? Just to push it a little bit further and have some even higher point that you're trying to connect all of this stuff back to. Okay, so I pulled out another example here, one that was asking a question instead of providing a statement and kind of lacking that map of supporting points. And the reason I pulled this one out is because I wanted to show you an example of how you can revise what you've done this week to actually make it something that's going to be usable for you in your draft. So in this case, the person is referring to capital punishment, I believe. So the United States should keep, and I think this, I already changed this a little bit actually when I was putting it in here. This person had used a first person pronoun like we, so remember that you can't use first person pronouns in an academic MLA type argument because it's very formal in terms of what your audience will need. So I had changed this to the United States should keep this. We'll say capital punishment around, and then the person also said because it is actually doing good in most cases, and originally it had been phrased as a question, so we're just going to make it a statement. This person had said, should we keep it around? And I'm saying it should be kept around because it seems like that's the direction this person's leaning. So here we have our overall proposal. The United States should keep capital punishment around, and then we have our evaluation because it is actually doing good in most cases. And then we would need to just provide a map of our subpoints or reasons why we believe it is doing good for society in the majority of cases. And what we do have here, I want to point out, is a very well qualified thesis statement. So it's not saying always, in every single case, capital punishment is 100% right. It's saying in most cases it is doing good for society. So, and we're talking about good in the literal sense, like a noun, like doing good things, and so that's why we're using the noun version of the word instead of the adverb version of the word, which would be well, if you're questioning my grammar at this point. Okay, so I'll just continue on by saying again, you would want to map out those points, so you could say based on A, B, and C, and those would be your reasons. So you wouldn't actually say the word reasons, you wouldn't actually say A, B, and C, but then you would say what are the positive outcomes of capital punishment here, and those would serve as points to focus your body paragraphs and things you would want to put in the topic sentences of those paragraphs and focus your evidence on in those paragraphs. And then like we saw in some of the other examples already, you might even have an overarching counter argument that you would want to attach to the beginning of this thesis statement here using that surprising reversal structure that I alluded to before. So something like, although many people question if the death penalty is appropriate in modern times, the United States should, in fact, keep capital punishment around because it is actually doing good in most cases based on 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C reasons. And that would be the overall thesis. See, it's all one sentence and it is punctuated correctly. And it would give you a counter argument to talk about right after your introduction. It would give you your main body supporting points, and it would give you your overall proposal and evaluation points to develop more toward the end of the essay before your conclusion. So that's going to give you a whole lot more to work with for your 6-page, I think it is, 5 or 6 page minimum for the essay as a whole. So if you're wondering how you're going to fill up all those pages, it's by having a good thesis statement that really maps out all your points and developing each point in body paragraphs. Okay, so this last example I pulled out just because there were some good questions here, and I wanted to try to address them because it seems like there was some confusion among all of you as to what was the best answer to the question. So this person says, of course, the thesis is subject to tweaking as the research process continues. Yes, that is definitely true, by the way. Also, some information in my thesis is from sources, so if your thesis contains information from sources, do you have to cite it in the thesis, or can you bring them up in the introduction, cite them there, and then restate them in the thesis? So in general, you do not want to be citing anything in your thesis. Your thesis should be comprised of entirely your own opinions. Your overall central claim and your subclaims are your major points that you're going to develop in the body of the essay. And then when you get into those body paragraphs developing each of your points, that's where you will actually bring in the evidence to prove the point that you're trying to develop in each respective paragraph. And so because the thesis just really encompasses your argument, it should be all your opinion, not evidence from your sources. Remember, evidence is facts, and the only thing you need to cite are the facts that come from your sources. Now, when we're citing an expert and we quote them, we treat that as a fact. So if it's word for word or even paraphrase of what your source said, then you do need to cite it. But if it is your opinion, part of your argument, or one of your major points to support your overall central claim, then it is your opinion and you do not need to cite it in your thesis. You'll just develop it and prove it in a body paragraph where you will have hopefully ample amount of evidence to support it and develop it and cite all of that evidence. And so then also kind of implied here is something about the introduction. If you bring in any background information into your introduction, you do need to cite that as well. Okay, so then I also just wanted to point out a couple of the good things that you guys brought up in your comments this week. I noticed that a lot of you were talking about the issues that were raised in each of your topics and thesis statements, but what I'm more interested in here is whether or not you guys can help each other maybe craft your thesis in a way that will be more helpful as you draft your essays. So I know we're getting close to the deadline for comments, but even in your reflection, can you think of ways that you could maybe extend what you've written at the beginning of this week to make it more applicable to something that would kind of present a central claim and outline several points to develop it that you could then expound upon in your body paragraphs. So let's look at one example here of a comment that I thought did kind of push things in a new direction. Very good topic for your paper. Lots of debate here on what should be done and what is being done. What do you think is the best solution? So I really loved this comment because, as I mentioned before, a lot of you had topics and thesis statements that made evaluations but maybe didn't push that the next step further into a solution. And so for several of you, I kept wanting to say, you know, what is the solution that you're calling for here? Or is there a proposal that you're calling for based on this? And so I was really glad that this person was able to touch on that in their comments. And so please do consider that in your reflections. If you think you might want to add a proposal, please do comment on that as you reflect at the end of this week. And then this person says, reading your thesis, I think it's a great start, but I'm kind of curious what your arguments are going to be. I think this will be an amazing paper, but would you state your argument in your thesis so the reader knows the topic of the paper along with your argument? This is also a paper I look forward to reading. So I thought this was really good because what I think this person is trying to say is, can you kind of map out what your points are going to be to develop your argument? And that's what I also wanted to see in several of your posts this week. So if you were to present your overall position, that's great. That's a really good start. But just your central claim itself is not the overall thesis. So make sure that you're attaching that central claim to all of your subpoints or reasons to come up with your overall comprehensive thesis statement, and perhaps a counter argument if you're going to be using that surprising reversal structure. So just make sure as you comment that you help each other come up with your reasons and also add what's missing, which I did see in several of your posts as you were reflecting on the issues that were raised in each of your topics. Okay, so I think that is getting close to most of what I wanted to pull out just at this point midweek. I'm sure I'll have more to say as we get to the end of the week. But I did want to also say, just to wrap up here, that there were a lot of late posts this week. So if you question why your grades might be a little bit lower, go back and check if you made it in for the Wednesday at midnight deadline, because I did take off some points for the original posts being late. But hopefully you'll get all your comments in by midnight tonight, so that won't be an issue as I grade the comments as well. Okay, please email me if you have questions as always, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say over the rest of the week. Thanks.